All right, ready for a deep dive. Today, we're tackling spirituality and modernity. You know, it's crazy how these big ideas just kind of pop up when you least expect it. Like, imagine, right? You're in a cafe, the smell of coffee everywhere, just bits and pieces of conversations around you, and then you stumble across this podcast, Between Shelves, all about how modern life kind of shapes our view of spirituality. And what's really cool is how it looks at creators who are like reinterpreting those spiritual themes through a modernist lens, making them resonate with us today, you know?
It's almost like even with all the science and tech, we haven't stopped looking for meaning. It's just, well, it's taken on these new forms.
Exactly. And that's where you come in. You're amazing at making sense of these things that seem so different. So from those between shelves notes, what really jumped out at you?
One of those striking things, I think, is how they use modernism itself, even with its focus on the individual, on skepticism, as a way to explore spirituality.
Yeah.
They don't shy away from the tension between, like, traditional spirituality and modern thinking.
How do they even reconcile that? Those two seem like they'd be at odds.
Oh, they find ways to bridge that gap. For instance, they really stress individual experience. Spirituality becomes less about, strict rules and more about personal exploration, using things like meditation or journaling to connect with your own understanding.
It's like they're saying, hey, you can create your own spiritual path. That's pretty empowering.
Oh, it is. And it leads to another interesting idea, reinterpreting tradition. Modernists often kind of deconstruct traditional frameworks, like religious doctrines or myths, but not to dismiss them. It's more about finding those universal truths hidden inside.
So less about taking things literally and more about the symbolic meaning, the metaphors that speak to being human.
Exactly. They see those old stories as enduring for a reason, like they hold some kind of timeless wisdom. And it's not just about rethinking old traditions. Between Shelves also talks about how modernist art and literature themselves become like places for spiritual reflection.
Well, that's interesting. Are there specific artists or works they mention?
Think about like T.S. Eliot's poetry, Virginia Woolf's novels, or James Joyce's Stream of Consciousness. They really dig into the complexities of human existence, exploring themes of, alienation, searching for identity, yearning for connection.
So even with all the chaos and fragmentation of modern life, these artists found a way to tap into something deeper, almost spiritual, and offered their audience a way to connect with that too.
Yes, and it goes back to a key point the sources make. Finding meaning in a disenchanted world. Modernism acknowledges that disillusionment that comes with, industrialization, scientific advancements, all those rapid societal changes. But instead of just giving in to despair, it tries to rediscover wonder and enchantment.
It's like finding awe in the everyday.
Yeah.
Appreciating the beauty of, a sunset or a piece of art without needing traditional religious explanations.
Exactly. It's about finding meaning in those glimpses of, something bigger than ourselves. And this is where it gets really interesting, because they bring in the integration of science and philosophy.
That's an unexpected combo. How do those even come together in this search for meaning?
Well, remember, modernism is all about questioning and exploring new ideas. So they use concepts from quantum mechanics, which really challenges how we understand reality, right? Or psychology, particularly Jung's idea of individuation, to explore how everything is connected.
So they're using these frameworks, these scientific and philosophical frameworks, as tools to understand where we fit in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. And this leads to another fascinating connection, the link between spirituality and ethical ideals. You see, modernists often saw things like social justice, working towards a better world, environmentalism, all of that, as forms of spiritual practice.
It's like taking that internal journey and translating it into actions that actually benefit the world. It's not just personal growth then, it's about making a difference.
And finally, they emphasize exploring the inner self. They use practices like dream interpretation, influenced by Jung, or psychotherapy, as tools for uncovering those spiritual dimensions within us.
It's like they're encouraging us to look inward, explore our own consciousness to understand our own spirituality.
Yes. And through that inward journey, we can connect with something larger than ourselves, something truly profound.
This is so much more nuanced than I initially thought. Modernism isn't just about rejecting tradition. It's about finding new ways to connect with the spiritual in a world that's constantly changing. But they also tackled some other complex issues too, right?
Yes. The sources also delve into how modernist thought approached the concept of race, which is where things get even more, complex.
Before we go there, It's important to acknowledge that this is a sensitive topic. We'll be exploring the historical context, not endorsing any particular views. We're here to learn and understand, not to judge.
Absolutely. With that in mind, it's crucial to understand that modernist thought, particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries, often approached race through a lens that, well, we now recognize as problematic. They often viewed race through the lens of biological essentialism and hierarchical categorization, which unfortunately led to some harmful ideas.
So let's break that down a bit. What do we mean by biological essentialism here?
Essentially, it means they saw race as a fixed, inherent characteristic, determined by physical traits, like skin color or skull shape. This led to classifying humanity into, well, rigid racial categories, with, unfortunately, European imperial powers placing themselves at the top.
Yeah, and this hierarchy of race, that was used to justify colonialism and exploiting non-European people.
Yes. It was used to support the idea of a civilizing mission, where colonizers thought they were bringing enlightenment and progress to supposedly backward cultures. It's unsettling to think about how these ideas contributed to so much suffering and injustice.
It really reminds you how important it is to critically examine the ideas we inherit and their impact. It's not just history, it's connected to how we see the world today.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that even within modernism, there were dissenting voices, people who challenged those dominant narratives.
So tell me more about that. Who were these individuals pushing back against these harmful ideas?
Thinkers like W.E.B. Du Bois and Frantz Fanon, they emerged as powerful critics of those racial hierarchies, embedded within, well, modernist thought. They examined the intersections of race, colonialism, and modernity, exposing how dehumanizing those racial constructs were.
So they were like the intellectual rebels, challenging the status quo, offering a different perspective.
Precisely. Du Bois, for example, introduced the concept of double consciousness, which describes, well, the experience of African Americans navigating a world that constantly judges them based on their race. He highlighted the psychological toll of this divided sense of self.
That's a powerful concept. It captures the lived experience of racism in a way that theories just can't.
And Fanon, writing from his perspective as a black man in a colonized society, explored the psychological and cultural impact of colonialism, showing how it imposed a racialized identity, separating them from their own cultures and histories.
So they were essentially deconstructing those colonial narratives, the ones used to justify those racial hierarchies.
Exactly. And their work is so relevant today as we continue to deal with, well, the legacies of those systems of oppression. It reminds us that progress isn't always linear, and that there are always people who dare to question and challenge those prevailing narratives.
It's truly inspiring to see how these individuals, even within a period that often perpetuated those harmful ideas about race, offered a different way of thinking, a path towards understanding and change.
And those voices are essential. They help us understand the past and how it continues to shape the present. But before we move on, I think it's helpful to step back and provide some context for those who might not be as familiar with modernism as a movement.
That's a great point. When we say modernism, what are we actually talking about? What makes this movement so significant?
Modernism, in its simplest form, was a cultural, intellectual, and artistic movement that emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It was a response to those huge transformations happening in the world back then, like industrialization, urbanization, global conflicts like World War I.
So like the world was undergoing this massive shift, and modernism was a way to make sense of it all.
Precisely. It was about breaking free from those old ways of thinking, finding new forms of expression that captured, well, the essence of the modern age. And this showed up in every area you can think of.
This deep dive has been so, insightful. It's amazing how exploring something from over a century ago can still offer so much wisdom for today.
It shows you the power of ideas. They go beyond time and place. They shape how we understand ourselves and the world.
So as we wrap up, what's the key takeaway for our listener? What do we hope they'll remember?
I think the most important thing is that modernism, even with all its complexities, offers these valuable lessons about what it means to be human. It reminds us that search for meaning, for purpose, for belonging, it's an ongoing journey. It encourages us to question, to explore, to create our own paths, and maybe most importantly, it challenges us to use our spiritual awareness to create a more just and equitable world for everyone.
Beautifully said. And for our listener who wants to dive deeper, be sure to check out those show notes. For links to all the sources we mentioned, you can explore the works of those incredible thinkers, from T.S. Eliot and Virginia Woolf to, W.E.B. Du Bois, Frantz Fanon, James Cone, Gustavo Gutiérrez, and Rubem Alves. There's a whole world of knowledge and inspiration out there.
We couldn't agree more. Take that leap and explore. See what resonates with you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it, well, thought-provoking and enriching.